All right. Good afternoon, Cyclones. My name is Matt Van Winkle from the ISU Alumni Association. Thank you so much for joining us today for our webinar. Before we get started, I want to ask everyone to put in the chat where you're watching from. Leave a comment in the chat. We want to see some participation today as we bring Kathleen on in just a little bit. She's going to want to see your comments coming in, and we'll start by just letting us know what city, what state you're watching from, maybe even like your grad year, anything you want to put in the chat as we just kind of get going here over your lunch hour. We encourage you to use that chat box throughout the webinar today. Leave your questions, comments throughout the presentation. There's going to be time at the end of the presentation for Kathleen to get to some of those, and we'll star those and make sure we get to those at the end of the webinar. All right, I want to introduce our presenter today, 2004 Iowa State alum, Kathleen Reeson. Kathleen started, bought, sold, grown, and closed businesses over the last 15 years, and in the process, she's developed a penchant for solving unique problems quickly. She's currently a partner at Kanoan Strategy, where she works with successful founders to answer one of the biggest questions in their business journey. Should they scale, sell, or evolve? She helps leaders navigate high-stakes transitions with clarity, curiosity, and confidence. And we're glad to welcome her as she shares her curiosity, how your curiosity can be your superpower, and put it into action. Kathleen, it's so good to see you again. You've done a few of these with us now, haven't you? I
I
can't
think
remember
this
how
is
many
my
you've done with the Alumni
third, maybe.
Association. Yeah, it's over the past couple of years, and you're an alum too. And did I see 2004? So you just passed 20 years of being a grad. So congratulations. You get back to campus quite a bit.
You know what? I get up there at least about once a year, and
Yeah,
as my oldest is looking at colleges, so we're actually going to be up as
awesome.
parents of prospective students
Oh my
here
gosh,
in a couple months. Yeah, which is just crazy.
that's got to be a cool full circle moment for you to be a
It
student
it
and how your
really
kid's
is.
going through it. That's cool.
I know. I
Awesome.
want to show them all the fun stuff, but
Well, you have
not everything. There are some
yeah,
secrets.
of course, yeah. Well, you've got a great presentation for us today. I'm going to turn it over to you and enjoy, everybody. Again, leave your comments in that chat, and we'll get to those at the end.
Okay, thank you, Matt. And I know Matt said you can ask questions at the end, but feel free to put those in whenever, and I'll get through them as we can through the presentation. But really, this is to have a lot of fun today, and we're going to learn a few things too. So we'll get started. I love to see everybody from all over. This is very exciting. We're going to talk today about curiosity. It's one of my favorite topics to show you and to teach. So first off, I'm going to show you an example here, if I can get my slide. Maybe give me 1 second. Okay, so first off, I wrote 2 books. Now I say this not because I want to brag, or I'm very humble in this respect. This is the first book, but I want to tell you a little bit about the process, because any of you that are curious on this is a whole process. So this book, Joy of Uncertainty, A Guide to Creating a Meaningful Life, it was actually ready to go in October of 2019. But something in me said now is not the right time to actually post and share this book. So then March of 2020 happens. And as you guys know, COVID hit. It was a really uncertain time. It was crazy. And I thought maybe this is the time to release this book about joy and uncertainty. So I went through the self-publishing route. If any of you are aspiring authors, you follow closely on this. If you're in the self-publishing space, Amazon's the place that you want to be. So I was really excited. On April 1st of 2020, I start to upload this book onto Amazon. And during the process, there are a lot of categories you can pick that'll say how your book will show up on Amazon. So just like if you were selling a product, you would pick the categories. And there was one category called vision. And I was really excited because this seemed to fit my book perfectly. It was talking about where you are today and where you're going to be in the future and how you get there. And that was vision. So I quickly selected vision. And then I hit publish and I launched that book. Then every new author, they want to get this banner called the #1 new release author. It's very exciting. You want to earn it. And I was that author. I wanted to do that. And really excited to tell you, as you'll see in this next slide, I did indeed earn #1 new release author. But if you can see in the middle there of that picture, I earned #1 new release author in eye problems. Turns out the thing I thought vision was and what Amazon thought vision was not the same thing. Amazon actually had classified vision as eye problems, really more for optometrists or eye doctors. And in my case, they were not the same thing. So here I am on this day, very excited that my book published, and I reached #1 new release author in eye problems, and I thought I was crushed. the lesson for me was I wasn't curious enough, right? I didn't dig in. I didn't understand what vision truly meant. And so I came up with this number one new release in eye problems. So then I said, well, what do I do with this? Does it really matter? And I found out that I actually don't have to categorize my number one new release in anything. I could just promote it as number one new release. So between you and me, here's our little secret is that I'm a number one new release. We just drop the eye problems and we don't talk about that. So that's how I carry forward. And that's something that's really helped. But at the core, this is about curiosity. So while that's a funny story, what we're going to talk about today is what is curiosity? And then we're going to cover the science. There's a little bit of neuroscience that goes into that. And that will actually explain what stops us from being curious. Kids are really great about being curious. As adults, we tend to be less curious. And so we're going to talk about why that is. And then I'm going to give you some examples of people that really use curiosity to their advantage and how you can become that person and how you can use curiosity as your superpower. All right, everybody in? Let's get started on this. So what is curiosity? Now, one of the things that I want to start with is just to get an idea, and let's use the chat. So go ahead and just put in the chat, what do you think curiosity is? And I know it takes a moment for everything to pop up. So go ahead and write in the chat, what do you think it is? Is it a mindset? Is there a definition? A lot of words have these really great, solid definitions. So what do you think curiosity is? We'll give you a minute here to put it in. Yeah, we got lots of different answers of what people are thinking. Yeah, okay. So yeah, a desire to learn or discover. Absolutely. That's a great thought on what it is, asking questions. The more that you're able to ask questions, when we get into a fixed mindset, that's when we kind of get into some challenges. Being aware and wondering about our surroundings. Yeah, these are great examples of curiosity. Yes, thank you for giving some of those examples. So I asked Webster here, what do you think the definition of curiosity is? And what Webster said was an eager desire to learn. And here's the important part, and often to learn what does not concern one, or inquisitiveness. Now, if my parents were on here today, they would say, oh yeah, that's Kathleen, always wanting to know things that doesn't concern her. But the piece that's really important there is that letting your mind wander is a part of curiosity. So you start someplace and you allow your mind to wander and pick up more information. When I was at Iowa State, I had a double major in advertising and accounting. And a lot of people would say to me, advertising and accounting, that's kind of crazy, right? To have advertising and accounting using your left brain and the right side of the brain, and aren't those in conflict? And really, it was just about this deep desire to learn more and be curious. So yeah, Sally wanting to know more. Absolutely. So eager desire to learn and often to learn what does not concern one. So if that's the definition that we're putting on it, then let's think about why is it important to be curious? So I think about that. Why do you think it's important to be curious? I asked ChatGPT because I was curious what ChatGPT would say. And ChatGPT had some good thoughts. And I agree with a lot of what ChatGPT had to say. Adaptability, that's an important one, especially as you look at the last 5 years. I think if we've learned anything, it's that we do not live in a space of constant. We live in a space of all over the place. So we've got to be able to adapt for it. Curiosity is something that allows us to have this innovation in this creative space. And that's really powerful as we look at how we lead both our lives and businesses and how we relate to others. And I think the last piece that ChatGPT, I thought, keeps you energized. Well, that's kind of cool. I like to be energized. So if curiosity can help me with that, I'm all in. So these are some of the pieces that I found really helpful that ChatGPT shared. So now I want to share with you the science behind curiosity. Now, as I share this with you, I do have one caveat, and that is that I am not a neuroscientist. And we might actually have somebody here on this call. If you're a neuroscientist or you have a background in science, definitely put it in the chat. I may be asking you questions. But my dad actually is a neuroscientist. So I grew up in an environment where he never wanted to be accused, of not having a brain. So he took he had a rat brain in his lab, and then he had a sheep brain, and he put them in resin, and he actually carried these with them. So he would sometimes have them in his pockets. And well, as a little girl, this was a little odd, but anytime that somebody might say, "Hey, are you not very smart today?" or give any sort of comment about level of intelligence, he would whip out his brains and say, "No, I have a brain." And that is how I grew up. So he taught me a lot about neuroscience, and I'm going to share a little bit with you today on it. So if we look at the brain, this is very crude, very high level, okay? So keep in mind, we're not going deep here, we're going very high level. There are lots of different components to the brain. And what we're going to talk about are just some of the core pieces of it. So you've got your front side here, the front, if you can see at the front of my head, that's your frontal lobe. And then you've got the back side, you've got your spinal cord that runs up and down your back and then attaches at the base of your brain. And then you've got the limbic system. The limbic system is the emotional epicenter. Okay, so when you're born, you live mostly in your limbic system. So you think babies or toddlers, or those of you that have kids, you know that the reactions that they have, if you take a toy away from a toddler, they're not going to rationally say, "I do not appreciate that you took my toy." They are going to erupt. They don't like that. So the limbic system is on fire. Now, as you age, your frontal lobe gets developed. And this is where you have logic and reasoning. So if we were talking about emotional intelligence and the study of emotional intelligence, we'd be talking all about the limbic system. So let's just dig into the limbic system here. This is now a picture of like the open sides of your brain. And within the limbic system, there's 3 key areas. Again, lots of areas, but 3 that we're going to talk about. So you've got the amygdala, the hypothalamus, and the hippocampus. So this is like your science lesson for today. Okay, so your amygdala, that blue sort of looks like that the hangy down part of the back of your throat. How's that for technical terminology? So your amygdala, that's where any sort of sense comes in. So you've got your spinal cord. Anytime it's activated, like you put your hand on a hot oven, the amygdala is saying fire, 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 alert, alert, alert. There's a problem here. And your amygdala goes right next door to your hypothalamus, which is that orange circle. Kind of looks like a P, but it's an orange circle. And it's telling your hypothalamus, we have a problem. And your hypothalamus is saying, oh, a problem, we've got to take some kind of action. So in the case of you put your hand on a hot oven, the hypothalamus says, pull that hand off, it's dangerous. And so you pull your hand back. And then you've got the hippocampus, which is that long purple thing that kind of looks like a hockey stick, or it's commonly known as a seahorse. It's like without the head. So I'll let you think about what that looks like. But you've got the hippocampus, and the hippocampus is really important in understanding where we store those memories. So now if you put your hand in a hot oven, the amygdala is saying, oh, we've got a problem, alert, alert, alert. The hypothalamus says, pull that hand back. And the hippocampus says, see, never put your hand on a hot oven because you'll burn it. And the hippocampus stores that memory. And so now as we age, this whole process is working in overtime. You think about, like, I'm 43. Matt already said I graduated in 2004. So you could do the math on that. I have formed a lot of connections, and some of them are really helping me, and maybe some of them aren't. But I've learned a lot of those pathways. So if you think about a little baby, when they're born, they're forming these pathways. They don't know it yet. So they think, I'm hungry. Well, I'll just cry, and then somebody will bring me food. And then we reinforce that. So they get stored in their hippocampus that they're hungry, cry, food. Amygdala says, there's something that's up here. You need something. The hypothalamus says, cry, so you get the food, and the hippocampus stores the memory. So are we seeing how this works? Okay, got it. So this is the limbic system. Now, what the heck does that have to do with curiosity? Well, that's actually the exact reasoning right here. The limbic system and the connection to the frontal lobe is where curiosity lives. Okay, so curiosity generally sits within the limbic system. But as we get older and we're told it's time you grow up, it's time you be rational, we go to work and they get paid to have executive presence. We get paid to be wise. So we get paid to climb up that ladder to the frontal lobe. And that's where the dollars sit, right? But our curiosity lives in our limbic system. And so the real trick is, how fast can you move from the limbic system to the frontal lobe, back and forth, climb up and down that ladder and say, yes, I know I need to be reasonable, but we have an unreasonable challenge and we've got to think differently. Now I need to climb down to my limbic system, and now I need to let myself play there. And what typically happens is, when we're curious, when we're learning more, something in our frontal lobe says, we already know that. We already learned that information. Remember, our hippocampus has stored some kind of memory, and our frontal lobe is saying, we've already figured this out. We already knew what was possible. You don't need to go down there. You don't need to waste time. You don't need to be curious about that. We already know the answer. Or somebody else around us says, this is what it is, and we don't necessarily question, because that takes time. Of course, maybe they're right. And so we create in our frontal lobe that rational, and that reasoning stops us from climbing down that ladder. But the real mark of being curious, and if we were having an emotional intelligence conversation, we'd be talking about emotionally intelligent leaders. They can climb up and down that ladder. Okay. And so make sure, if you have any questions on this is the foundational to what we're talking about. So if you have any questions about it, drop them in the chat and we'll walk through that. But this is so important about how we walk up and down that ladder. And so people that do this really well, they practiced it to say, okay, frontal lobe, calm down for just a second. I'm just going to step down that ladder, and I'm going to just hang out in this curiosity space. Now, that sounds a little bit weird if we were sitting in a meeting and somebody heard you say to yourself, hey, frontal lobe, calm down. We're going to hang back down to this limbic system. So typically it's an internal conversation that you're having with yourself to say, hey, it's okay. We're actually just going to go take a break here, and we're going to go hang down and be curious. But this is a process as you want to get more curious, and you want to calm your frontal lobe from really thinking that there's a problem that you're going into curiosity. You actually have to talk yourself through it. So that's one step that you can use. We'll talk about a few others at the end of this. Okay, so I'm going to actually give you some examples of people who have used curiosity. Does anybody know who this is? If you know, just go ahead and drop it in the chat. Okay, you put that in there. I'll hear your guesses. But this is a really cool lady. She has done a ton in her own products that she's created, but she's also done a lot in sharing her wisdom over the years and how she did it. And so I've really appreciated learning from her and understanding how she approached what she did, because again, she's a highly curious person. And so I will reveal to you who this is. This is Sarah Blakely, for any of you that did not know. And what I love about Sarah is that Sarah, when she was in college, she had to go to a party, and she was asked to wear white pants to this party. I think it might have been a sorority party, but that part's neither here nor there. So she was asked to wear these white pants, and she wanted something that helped her feel fit and in shape and pulled together. And so she looked at pantyhose, but they really didn't work with her white pants. And so what she did was she cut off the bottom of the pantyhose, and so that they were okay to wear with her pants. And she invented Spanx. Now, Spanx did not take off at first. She hired people. She was really curious about how she could promote them. She even bought a shirt, and she would go into New York and she would wear her shirt that said Spanx. And so to get more attention, she went to every hosiery company and tried to sell her Spanx idea, and all of them turned her down. And then she said, but how could I get this out there and get this into the market? And she would always ask the people that she met with, if they turned her down, she'd say, but how could I do it? And one of them said, I'm not going to take you on as a client or as a product, but I will give you access to a manufacturing facility that they had, and at least allow you to produce some of this. And so she invested $5,000 of her own money, and she started out of her basement, and she created what is now known as Spanx and sold the company. And then a couple of years ago, she got the idea of, she loved tennis shoes and she loved high heels, but high heels were so uncomfortable that she thought, how could I tie these together and make a comfortable heel that somebody would want to wear? And so then she created this, which you can see in the middle. It's a shoe that's also a high heel, and it's called Sneaks. So she had Spanx, and then she created Sneaks. And the cool thing about Sneaks is that the people are now wearing these. Some of them have run in them, but I just saw a post about how there was this group of people that ran half marathons, multiple half marathons, and then they were wearing these shoes throughout the day. So it's a testament to her question where she was curious to say, could I make a high heel that was as comfortable as a tennis shoe? And so that opened up that space. Like, that was not a logical thing to do. Even if you look at the design or the look of that, to wear a tennis shoe-esque product with a dress is not something that's very common. Now, the other piece that I think is very unique about Sara Blakely is that she's married to a guy named Jesse Itzler. And if you've ever met Jesse, heard about Jesse, seen Jesse, read anything about Jesse, Jesse's kind of a kooky dude. And Jesse is the owner of Marquis Jet. He may have just sold off his share in it. But anyway, he was a part of Marquis Jets. He's owned some pro sports teams. If you've ever seen of the Big Ass Calendar, it's what's called Big Ass Calendar. He created that. So he's done a lot of really cool things. He also was a highly curious person. And he said, I hear the Navy SEALs are very disciplined. I wonder if I could hire one and have him come live at my house for a period of time to see what would happen. And he did. And he wrote a book about it. It was really cool. So here's a highly curious woman who's created some pretty cool things, who knew the power of being around other curious people. And so then she waited. She said, the dating pool, she really spent a lot of time trying to figure out who could be her match. And then she met Jesse Itzler, and she says, when I met him, I knew that he was somebody that could match me in my curiosity, because that was something that was really important to her. And then they met and got married shortly after that. So I think they really demonstrate well how curiosity can play out. Now, this next one I'm going to show you is a guy by the name of Bob Castley. Now, Bob Castley is not as well known as Sara Blakely or Jesse Itzler, but Bob Castley's work is well known. You've probably seen it and not known it. Bob is a sculptor who used to travel around the world and build these exquisite sculptures for zoos and aquariums and some like science centers and parks. So his work is in New York. There's a lot in the Midwest. His work's out on the coasts. But what he's most famous for is the City Museum in St. Louis. If you've ever been to the City Museum, post it in the comments. Post like your favorite thing about the City Museum. I want to hear that. And I'll tell you, for anybody that hasn't, what this is. Put it on your bucket list. It's in St. Louis, and it's the coolest. I just took my kids last month, and I took them when they were really little, and I took them again last month, and it's such a cool experience. So the City Museum, here's some pictures of the City Museum. So Bob had this idea. He wanted to build a place where people could just play around, and he wanted to do it with reusable materials, so salvage scrap materials. So yeah, every floor is a new adventure. The organ in the cave area, absolutely. And so he built this incredible part playground, part jungle gym, part museum, part architecture. It's so hard to describe. But if you back up in Bob's career, Bob had built these really cool sculptures for all these places. And he said, I wonder if we could build them in an interactive way where people could come to a museum and experience it by not just looking, but by touching and feeling. So how do I pull in those other senses? If you go back to that neuroscience piece, he wanted to pull in other senses. How could they enjoy it in a different way and experience it in a different way? And so he sold some big sculpture, made a bunch of money, and he told his wife at the time that he was going to buy this old abandoned shoe factory, International Shoe Factory in St. Louis. This thing was run down. There were mushrooms growing in the floor. To say it was dilapidated probably doesn't even do it justice. And he takes this idea and he goes to about 20 other people and he says, hey, can we make the Castley crew, you guys come in and help me design something incredible. And we're going to do it. We're not going to buy anything new. We're only going to use old parts. And then people thought he was crazy. And yet he said, this would be really cool to do. We're going to do it. And so you can see in the picture on the left that is a legit airplane. It flew at one time and he put it up on this display. There's a school bus that's up there. It's incredible. I've been there twice and I haven't seen half of it. There's an ocean scene down below that you can see in that middle picture. And if you go in, it's like being in the gut of a whale. There's a tunnel that goes underground that it feels like you're like a groundhog underneath this tunnel, and you gotta squirm your way through it. And then on the right side, this is an example of a stairway. Nothing that you see at the City Museum is anything that you would see anywhere else. His mind just went into overdrive. Even the tiles and the mosaics. There's a story about when Bob was thinking about the tile that was going to be in this City Museum. And somebody was coming in to help him pick out the tile. And all of a sudden, he got out some markers and he started coloring on the floors what he wanted these tiles to look like. And this mosaic in that center, it's this beautiful floor, and that's how he came up with it. He literally just drew. He said, I don't know what's possible. Let's just let our minds play. And so it's this center where creativity and curiosity really joined together, and it created this incredible place called the City Museum. And then Bob built this up to a place that's really cool, and it's never ending. It's something you can still go see, and it'll change every time you go. And then he said, I wonder if I could do this with cement. So he started this place called Cement Land, and also in St. Louis. But unfortunately, he died before it was finished. So you can't go to Cement Land. Yeah, Matt, thank you. Also, Shoe Factory, chutes turned into human slides. Yeah. So he used the element around him, and he turned these chutes into slides. So you could go from the 6th floor to the 4th floor. Now, it's a nightmare if you have little kids and you want to be able to keep your eyes on them. That's probably not going to happen. We actually took my 5-year-old nephew, and it was great because my older kids could go with him. But this whole concept was built for the people that could truly just explore and let their minds wander. There's a circus component here. When we went, there was somebody juggling in the middle of this circus ring. So you just never know what you're going to find. It's the coolest thing ever. So make sure you go to City Museum. But the biggest thing to take away from this is this guy, Bob Castley, he just let his mind wander. He went down into that limbic system and said, what would be possible if I just let go of that rational thinking? If I just let myself play for a little bit, what could possibly happen? And so this is a great example of that. Now, the 2 examples I've given you so far, those are more entrepreneurial, bigger creations of a product or a thing. And I want to give you another example of somebody that is maybe a little bit closer to home and perhaps you've heard of. And that's Dr. Franklin. So Dr. Angela Franklin, if you guys know her, again, put it in the chat. She's a wonderful lady. She is the president of Des Moines University. And there are so many cool things about Dr. Franklin. What I think just really, she's the first woman and African-American president at Des Moines University. And that in and of itself is cool. When you hear her talk about her story, she says, well, I was in Atlanta and I was thinking about what was next in my career. And I got offered this position at Des Moines University. And I thought, hey, why not? She was just, could I do it? Just curious about it. And so that's really how she got into the role. But what I find the coolest about what Dr. Franklin's been up to, and there's a lot to choose from, but I was talking to her back this past spring, and I asked her about the move from the Des Moines campus, because they used to have all of their university was in the center of Des Moines. It was off of Grand Avenue. And they moved out to West Des Moines here in the last couple of years. And I asked her about that process, like, how did that happen? And she said, well, a few years ago, actually right before COVID, maybe a year before COVID, she was sitting with her board and she says, maybe I've gotten to the point where I've done everything that I could do. They were landlocked. There were a couple other challenges that they were having that really had to do with the constraints of the university. She says, maybe I've done everything that I could do here. It's time for me to look at another university. And the board really wanted to keep her. And they said, Dr. Franklin, what would it take for you to stay here? And she went down into her limbic system for a minute and she thought, and she says, I think if we could pick this university up and just move it to where there are not constraints, man, we could do so many things. And the board said, how could we do that? How would that be possible? And she says, I don't know, but let's figure that out. And so she really played in that space of curiosity. And then she got the team around her and she said, I don't know how we're going to figure this out. So she didn't let that frontal lobe stand in her way. I don't know how we're going to figure this out, but wouldn't it be great? All of our constraints that we had could be solved if we could just pick this university up and move it. And it turns out there was some land available in West Des Moines. They could figure out how to move that. They built a new university, and they had legacy at this old university. And so they got to figure out how that transition, what that all looked like. It was a really cool move, but it started because Dr. Franklin let herself go into curiosity and say, what would be possible? And now they're up to even bigger things because they have the space, and that's going to really serve these students. And the work that they're doing is incredible in the space of university education, that higher ed for meds. They're putting out a lot of really quality med school students. And doctors, like DOs, physical therapists, they're doing a lot for the medical community here in the Midwest and in Iowa. Oh, perfect. Thank you for showing that. Yeah, that's a picture of their new facility. It's out in West Des Moines. And they had so many constraints when they were over on Grand Avenue, but they came here, and this just opened up a ton of possibilities for them. And so that's the value of really being able to be in curiosity and seeing that. So of course, Sarah Blakely and Bob Castley, they built really cool things too, but you can also do it within the constraints of a corporation, or in this case, an institution. You can absolutely use your curiosity there as well. Now, this next one that I want to show you, I don't know how this one got in here. That's me. Now, I would have loved to say I put a nice picture of me in there, but as I was looking through pictures in my phone, because I want to show something that was fun, it turns out that just like every one of the pictures that I take looks like this. So I thought I'd show you the real me. But I want to give you a path of how curiosity can look right out of Iowa State as you evolve in your careers. And so I've had a really great example of that. That's one of the things that I'm really proud of, just letting myself be curious. So like I said, I came out of Iowa State just like all of you. I had double major in advertising and accounting. And when I was there, and I shared with you how people would look at me and say, what do those have in common? But I would be in the advertising. So I'd be over at the Greenlee School, and I'd say, well, I'm here and I love these classes, but I don't know, maybe I fit more over in the business college. And then I'd go to the business college and I'd say, oh, I love this, but maybe I'm more over in the Greenlee School. And so finding my path and just letting myself be curious, sometimes that can be hard because not everybody's going to understand it. Because if we live in that frontal lobe, right, we're looking for rational and reasonable, and we're looking for what everyone else is doing to see what works. But when you go into curiosity, that's when there's not necessarily a lot of people that are there. So we want to build up the number of people that are living in that, playing in that curiosity space. So I came out of Iowa State, and I really wanted to run businesses. I think business is fantastic. It's one of my favorite things just to play. Some people play by going skiing. Some people play by playing baseball. I love business and talking business. So when I got out of school, I studied for my CPA exam, passed my CPA exam, and then I went to work for KPMG. I did that for a few years, and here I am, 22 years old, and I'm walking into the offices of CFOs and saying, how does your business run? Just learning a lot, and they're sharing that. And so it was a great place to be really curious. And so then I got to the point where I said, okay, how am I going to apply this into life? And I went and worked at an ad agency for a couple of years. And when I was 6 months pregnant with my first child, didn't know any better, I started my first business. So I started Measured Intentions. It's an advertising agency that I ran for 10 years. And at year 7, my husband says, we should buy a gym. And I said, no, we are never buying a gym. And so you know how the story goes then, right? So we bought 3 gyms and 2 martial arts studios, because then I got curious and said, well, tell me more. What is it about that you want to buy a gym? Why do you want to buy a gym? And he had some really good reasons. And so we bought 3 gyms and 2 martial arts studios. Now we bought these as investments. And we thought, well, gosh, if we could just make some extra dollars, won't that be great? The kids are going to want to go to Iowa State or somewhere for college in the future. That'll be great. It turned out owning gyms during COVID is tough. That's a lot of work. And I got a whole lot of stories we could talk about that. But it gave me a ton of experience as I wandered through my business education. It just kept going into the real world. And then right after we bought all of these, about 2018, so I've been running Measured Intentions for 10 years at this point, I realized that I've been working in the marketing strategy space, and business strategy is really, that's my passion. And so I had a choice. I could either keep the business or sell it to my partner. Chose to sell it to my partner and evolved into Canoan Strategy, which is the company that I work in now. And this is a space where I literally just play with business owners and help them grow their businesses and understand at what point are we scaling, are we growing, are we evolving, what are we up to? And why I share all of that is that your path may not look like anybody else's path, and it's okay because you're on your own path. And I think so often, especially when we're highly curious people, we think that we've got to look like something else, or we think there's got to be a path. I know a lot of people that have worked in the same career, their same place their entire career, and there is nothing wrong with that. And you also don't have to do that. Like as I'm showing here on mine, it has evolved over time. And so not everybody has understood every move. I haven't even understood every move. But this last, being at Canoan Strategy, I have one other logo up there, and that's the SEPA. And so this is a pretty new certification. So some of you may know what this is, but it's a certified exit planning accreditation. And I don't use it. I'm not a financial advisor, any of that. But what I focus on is the income growth and the value building of companies. And so this designation is really, it's just to say that you understand that how you grow the value side of it. And I was just curious about how the SEPA would present this information, how the course would work and the test. And so I took this test and exam and just passed that. But it wasn't because I needed it for something external. It was because I was curious. And I share all of this with you, not because I'm trying to brag about everywhere that I've been by any means. It's to say that there might be something that you want to go after, and it may make sense to no one besides yourself. It might not even make sense to you, but it's still okay to go after it. And it's okay to be curious about what that could look like and to trust that that's all going to make sense at some point and it's going to benefit you. But the key is that you keep at it, that you let yourself be curious about lots of different things. And so perhaps your map might look a little bit different than mine. I'm sure that it does. Mine is very weird. It's got lots of different components to it. And so your path, if you were to start out, let's say you started out from Iowa State and you grew from there, whatever that looks like is perfect. And how can curiosity help you get to your next step? Whether that's growing in your career, maybe there is an accreditation that you want or a course that you want to take. Maybe you want to listen to Sarah Blakely's masterclass that she offers in entrepreneurship. Lots of people that aren't entrepreneurs love listening to that because it's really talking about the train of thought or the thinking. And then there's the entrepreneur concept, which is how you be an entrepreneur in a company. And if you are on an entrepreneur path, like that's a great way to just get exposed and learn. But there's lots of information out there. So that's a piece when I share with you some examples of between Sarah and Bob and Dr. Franklin and myself, there's lots of different places that curiosity can take you. But it all started because people were willing to ask questions to say, well, what would be possible if? So I'm going to give you a few different steps that can help you understand what this looks like for you and how you can grow your curiosity. So there's 3 different steps we'll talk about. And the first one has to do with listening to the nudge. Now, what is a nudge? A nudge is the questions we've been bringing up. What if? How could? Well, let me think about that. And when these nudges come up, it's often our brain saying, hey, do you want to climb down this ladder and hang out in the limbic system for a little bit? Now, typically when these nudges come up, again, we're up here in this frontal lobe, we're moving very quickly because we all love speed, and we ignore it. And when we ignore it, that's when we get into challenges. So think about it for a moment. Like what's the nudge for you? Like, do you know what it sounds like when your brain's actually triggering you to say, hey, maybe think about this a little bit more. So perhaps one of these questions rings true to you. What if? Why not? How could we? What's possible if? Perhaps one of those rings true to you, but think about it. If there's a scenario in front of you, we've all got challenges that we're facing, whether it's in business or life or questions that we get to answer. And if you posed that situation that you're dealing with one of these questions, what could be possible? Okay, let's look at this next one in our step. Step 2 is about taking a small step. Now, I think that there's a myth out there that we think curiosity and letting ourselves go there and then actually taking action, that's reckless. I'm not envisioning that anyone should quit their jobs because they had some idea and vision. Now that might make sense, but typically there's small steps that we can take to see if we can validate these thoughts that are going on in our head, this curiosity. So Dr. Franklin, when she was thinking about moving this location, there were lots of steps that went into it before they just up and said, we're going to open. There was a whole foundation fundraising strategy that had to go through that. They validated a lot of different pieces before they ended up moving that campus. With Sarah Blakely and the Spanx product, there were a lot of pieces. She went and talked with all those hosiery places, got rejected multiple times, but then had somebody tell her that guy that said, I'm not going to buy your product, but I will allow you my manufacturing access. And that was really what she needed, was the access. And so there are small steps that you can take to understand what that could look like for you. So for example, like if you're somebody, I know side hustles are a big thing, right? Perhaps you are considering a side hustle. So what is it that you could validate right now? Like, how could you be curious about that and say, well, what could I do to validate that, to move it just a little bit forward? We think like we got to make these big steps, but in reality, we just need little steps, right? We just need little tiny steps there. And step 3, I think this is one of the biggest ones. It's about sharing what you're thinking about, like what you are curious about, talking to the people around you about it. Because as you talk about it, it gives permission for other people to be curious as well. It lets them in on your space, but it also opens that up for them. And I'm going to give you a question that you can ask. Like when you're out networking, you're at lunch, you're at a coffee, you're talking with people, and typically the niceties happen first. Hi, my name is Kathleen. What's your name? Where do you work? Do you live around here? Some of those very basic questions, those are all fine. But when you want to get a little bit more meat into it, here's a question you can ask that opens up the curiosity space, both for yourself and the person you're talking to. You say, what are you curious about? Or what's your favorite thing that you're working on? And when they tell you, ask them, what about that is a lot of fun for you? And so then this is opening up that space for them to be able to talk about, like, well, what is it that I'm working on that is fun? Typically when I ask this question and say, well, let me do this for you guys right now. If I ask you, think about this. What is your favorite thing you're working on right now? If I could see your faces, most of the time what people do is they kind of pull back just a little bit and they think like, well, what is my favorite thing that I'm working on? And you can see them start to think through that process. And then when they respond, either it'll come out with something very specific or I don't really know. What you're really asking is like, what is exciting for you? And in order to answer that, because it's got an emotional attachment, you are actually asking them to walk down that ladder into the limbic system and attach an emotion to the work that they're working on and then respond back to you on it. Now you're having a conversation from a curious space. So you actually allowed them to do that work. And most likely, when you ask them, they're going to turn it back on you and say, well, what about you? What are you working on that's exciting? And that gives you permission to then have conversation about what you are curious about. So that gives this dialogue back and forth. And I promise you, if you have that level of conversation with somebody, the chances that you're going to follow up with them and have a bigger conversation about what you're both up to and how you could work together, whatever that looks like for your goals, is much higher. You're building that network of people around you. And it's so great to have a network of people around you that can build you up and can support you with your ideas. And in turn, you can support them. I think that's just really what makes the world exciting and makes the world go round. So that is a really important piece, is to share what you're asking, but also encourage other people and open the space for them and ask them, what are you curious about? Okay, so we're going to do a little bit of practice with this. Okay, we'll see how this works. We're going to use the chat. And what I want you to think about is I'm asking you to be curious, right? I'm curious. I am curious. I'm curious about what you're curious about. And I want you to type in the chat. So one thing that you learned today that you want to know more about. Maybe it's neuroscience. Maybe it's you like Sarah Blakely and you want to learn more about her. Maybe you're going to put the City Museum on your bucket list. Maybe it's about how you spend time in your curiosity and you go into the nudge. So drop it in the chat, anything that you've thought about over the last 45 minutes that we've been together, anything that you think, I want to know more about this, or I'm curious, or I could apply this question into this part of the world. So just think about that for yourself and drop it in the chat. What is one thing today? So this is, we're practicing that curiosity space. Remember, when we start with step one, it's listening to that nudge. So I'm giving you that nudge here and allowing you the space to take one small step, which is posting about it to say, what is that one thing? What is the one thing that could potentially help you be more curious, that could help you open up that space? And then let's think about how that could be put into action, how we can share that. Yeah, so lots of different things. We've got lots of different thoughts and comments on how this can work. I think when I first learned about curiosity, the neuroscience was a piece that I leaned into. That was something that was pretty exciting because it wasn't something that I knew well, even though I grew up in an environment where neuroscience was a big piece of it. Obviously, having a dad who's a neuroscientist, learning how that impacted our behaviors and our thought process. And then as I got older, and I actually went and studied emotional intelligence for a few years out on the coast. That wasn't on my slide curiosity space, but I went and studied emotional intelligence. And it wasn't because I knew what I was going to do with it. It was because I really wanted to understand how I could use that, one, for my family. I had preteens at the time and I wanted to be able to support them. But I also wanted to know, would this be helpful in business? And absolutely, it is incredibly helpful to have. Okay, so let's see. Sally recently retired from teaching, trying to navigate what might be next for me. I have always loved to learn. Absolutely. Yeah, Sally. So I'd encourage you, just think about what your interests are and explore down that path. So if you've got an interest in reading, for example, do you have an interest in writing? Do you want to write a book? If you want to self-publish, you let me know. I've got some tips on that. And if you pick vision as a category, just be really careful on that. Full circle, right? So Sally, like in that case, thank you for sharing, because really opening up that space of what are you curious about, that helps you to figure out what areas to dig further into, and just trusting that your interests will guide you. Okay, let's look at some of these others. Rebecca, how to engage our brains to be more curious on a daily basis. Yeah, yep. So absolutely. I think just answering that, listening to those nudges is that first step. Some people use a curiosity journal, and that really is just, if you wrote the questions down, like write those nudges down that I had listed, you could just write those down. And then each day, whether it's at the end of the day, the middle of the day, just pick a time and just journal for just a little bit to say, well, how would I answer that in the moment that I'm in right now? How would I answer one of those questions? And you'll get in that habit of really being more curious. Just remember, you're taking your frontal lobe and saying, hey, just calm down a minute. We're going to let ourselves go into this space of curiosity and we're safe. So that's a great way to create a daily habit on curiosity. Keith, living with a Navy SEAL and how that, yes, could inject some useful disciplines. Absolutely. Check out Jesse Itzler's book. Jesse Itzler's he's a cool guy to follow. He's all over the place and how he thinks. And I've never I have met Jesse. He's a super cool guy. But I've never seen somebody think the way that he does. And so I appreciate how he looks at life. He's just a very grounded guy. He created this race. It's an ultra marathon, and it is actually the same distance as climbing Mount Everest, but he doesn't take people to Mount Everest. They have this giant hill in their backyard, Jesse and Sarah do. And so if you go up and down it, it's like 429 times, then it's the equivalent to Mount Everest. And so people go to his house every year to run this race. And it's really cool. So he's a super neat dude, but living with a Navy SEAL. Yeah, get that book and check it out. Let me know what you think of it. Matt and Lisa Frericks, avenues for digging into professional development topics that tie into my curiosity and bridge personal and professional interests. Yeah, yep. So that's a great one. And I think, like, for you, if you think about what your professional development topics or what what the interests that you have from a personal and professional interests are, and then the digging that back into professional. So think you and I could talk a little bit more about that. And definitely, if you have questions on that, please let me know. I'll include my email here at the end, but maybe I can be a little bit more specific for you on where you might be able to look. Kate there, how to use curiosity at work when I'm typically okay with status quo. Yeah, absolutely. A couple different pieces there. One, is your work okay with status quo? And so if you're in an environment where it is with the work that's okay with status quo, and you're okay with status quo, then you're probably in balance there, and you might want to have your curiosity really be outside of work. The challenge comes in when one of those is out of balance. So when the work environment is saying, hey, status quo is not going to work here, and I need you to also not be status quo, or when you are saying, look, I don't want to be status quo. And so then you've got some kind of conflict there, and it's saying, okay, well, is the work going to accept me, or do I need to look at alternative places, or what's that balance and the disruption there? So how do you use it when you're typically okay with status quo? The question I have for you is, are you okay with status quo, or is that how it's been? So great question. I love that. And let me give you a little bit more on here. If you find that the work is okay with status quo and you aren't anymore, that's pretty typical, then there's some conversations that you can have, especially with your leadership, to say, hey, what are your expectations? I have new ideas and innovation. Are you open to hearing those, and see what they say? Okay, let's see. Oh, Matt and Lisa, you got another one. How to move out of the routines of life and work. Agreeing with Kate, especially after 15 plus years with the company. Yeah. So the routines of life and work, man, do those get ingrained in us? And let's break that down. Even that really is about the frontal lobe. Routines and the consistency exists in the frontal lobe. They do it to keep us safe, right? So our brain is wired to keep us safe, to keep us alive. And so we keep these routines so that it will protect us. Unfortunately, that can get into conflict with our curiosity and some of our excitement, our growth. If you remember, the thing that ChatGPT said about curiosity back in the beginning was that our adaptability, our energy, and our growth all are fueled by curiosity. And so sometimes those can be in conflict too. And so for Matt and Lisa, what I would recommend for you then is to look at those nudges, really maybe do that curiosity journal, understand what are some of those questions that are coming up for you that you can start to just let your mind wander about where your interests are. And then as you see that evolve, just let yourself kind of gravitate and play in some of those areas that are a little bit more exciting for you, and trust that you're going to end up in a spot that's better. And so that's where those small steps can take action there. Sometimes we think we got to make those big sweeping steps, but I really think if you just watch where your interests are and then follow that, you'll have some success. Okay, great questions. I really appreciate you guys showing up today and having all kinds of questions. Just to remind you what we learned. So we talked about curiosity, like what really is it? And there's actually neuroscience underneath it. So I think that's a pretty cool place too. And remember, what stops us then is that we get stuck up in that frontal lobe. Now, we had some examples in the chat of how that can happen. And so make sure that you're playing also in that limbic system, making sure that you're consciously giving yourself space to be able to walk down that ladder and entertain some of those nudges that are happening down in that limbic system. And then we talked about the real stories of curiosity at play, right? We got to see Sarah Blakely. We got to talk about Bob Castley. Again, go to St. Louis and check out the City Museum. It's uber cool. And we talked about Dr. Franklin and her move over to the West Des Moines campus. And then just to give you some examples through my own life of how curiosity can really support you. And lastly, remember those 3 steps as far as how we can grow. So step 1, right? Listen to those nudges. And step 2 is small steps. And step 3 is exactly what you all demonstrated. And thank you so much for that. And that is by sharing it, because when you share it with somebody, then they can then engage with it. And remember, when you're in a conversation, ask somebody, what are you curious about? Or what's most exciting for you right now that you're working on? And that doesn't have to be all at work. That could also be in their personal life as well. But when you open up the space for them, then usually they'll reciprocate that. So we covered a lot in 55 minutes today. If you have any questions, This is my email, and you can find me on LinkedIn, but feel free to reach out. I love chatting and just understanding where you're at and sharing information about this topic. It's really cool. So thank you so much for being here, and go Cyclones.
Awesome. Thank you, Kathleen. That was amazing. And yeah, if people have questions, mark down this email, and I think we'll do a follow-up. Maybe Katie will send a follow-up email, maybe include that in there as well. But thank you so much, Kathleen. And before we go, for people who registered ahead of time, we have a special ISU prize pack that we're going to be giving away. We randomly selected one person who registered for this. I think we had over 100 people register for this. Thank you, everyone, for watching live with us. But our winner is Catherine Hallenbeck. Catherine, congratulations for receiving your prize pack, and Katie will be in touch with you very soon on receiving that. Kathleen, thank you again. This was amazing. I have a journalism background, so I always, I was taught ABC, always be curious, right? So that's stuck in my mind as have a journalistic approach when you're doing these things, and always be curious. And I was thinking too, as you brought up like Chat GPT, like how easy is it now if we're curious about something, we can just say, Chat, can you tell me that, or Google, like how easy is it now to tap into some of those surface level curiosities? But I think some of your tips will help people as they kind of dig into some of their bigger curiosities, right?
Yes. Well, thank you for having me. This was a lot of fun.
This was fun. All right. Thank you, everyone, for watching. Thank you for supporting the Alumni Association and Iowa State University. We'll see you at our next webinar.